Hi everybody, and welcome to the Polar Bears International's live chat with Explore.org. We are coming to you from Churchill, Manitoba, Canada, on the shores of the Hudson Bay, right by the polar bear migration. So, for those of you that are used to tuning in to watch us, you're used to seeing us on Buggy 1 out in the middle of the tundra. But Buggy 1 is at the Buggy Doctor right now and just getting a little tune-up. So we have decided to broadcast today from the Churchill Northern Studies Center, which is just a wonderful research facility right outside of Churchill. And I've been lucky enough to stay here to do research before, well before I worked with Polar Bears International. And so it's kind of neat to be able to come to you live from here today. We're in a lab, we got fish tanks around, researchers, so it's pretty fun. And so I'm Alysa McCall. For those of you that haven't watched one of these before, I work with Polar Bears International as a staff scientist. And I'm joined by my guest today, Vicky Sanation. Vicky, do you want to briefly introduce yourself and a bit about what you do?
Yeah, sure. I'm really happy to be here, Alysa. Yeah, my name is Vicky Sanation. I live in Iqaluit in Nunavut, Canada, and that's to the northeast, probably 2,000 kilometers on Baffin Island, just across the way from Greenland. And I'm a wildlife ecologist, and I've been studying polar bears for about 10 years now, and I'm really pleased to be here with Polar Bears International. It's really been a fabulous 2 weeks.
Oh, thanks, Vicky. We've been really lucky to have Vicky here. I've been lucky enough to know Vicky since about 2010, I guess. That's when I started, and yeah, we were in Andy DeRoche's lab together. He's a professor at the University of Alberta in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and that's where we first met Vicky. And yeah, we've kind of, gone in separate directions, but like kept in touch, and it's just really cool to have you here this year. It's really wonderful. So for those of you that are watching, we love to take questions. You can put them in the chat window of Explore.org, the website. I believe also on Explore.org's Facebook page. I've got my handy dandy iPad here where I will be getting questions filtered in, and we'd love to kind of just chat about some topics. The overall theme today was about using technology to watch wildlife, study wildlife, why we use it. And so we'll kind of start chatting a bit about that, but we're happy to kind of talk about what you want to talk about as well. Maybe just to give a bit more context. So Polar Bears International at this time of year, October, November, during the polar bear migration near Churchill, we're here to bring polar bears to you with Explore.org's help and also the help of Frontiers North Adventures. And Frontiers North helps run the Tundra Buggy company out there. They own the Tundra Buggies. They own Buggy 1 that we go out in, and so they donate Buggy 1 to us all season so that we can broadcast live from Buggy 1, which we'll be doing again very shortly. And you can go on our website and check out our schedule for the season. We have some scheduled chats, but we're also this year trying to do a lot more kind of off-the-cuff stuff, more Facebook things, voiceovers out on the tundra. We got a lovely dusting of snow last night, and so that's a nice indication that hopefully winter's really well on its way, and we'll see a lot of great activity out there in the coming weeks. So please stay tuned for that. It's been lots of fun being here. So let's take a couple questions, first of all. One question that's coming up a lot. So this week we've been talking about technology, Vicky, and how we study polar bears and why, and some of the technologies we use. And so one thing that we've talked about before is collaring polar bears and why we do that. You can check out the Polar Bears International Bear Tracker online on our website, and one of those bears is sponsored by Explore.org, Ursula. She's been named by the community, and Ursula is actually denning right now. But you can see a lot of other bears that are active, so that means Ursula is pregnant, and we hope she gives birth in the spring. But there's other movements. So why, Vicky, do we study bears like this? Why do we put collars on them? And then maybe how do we do that too?
Yeah, well, polar bears move great distances over their annual cycle, over a year, and even more over their lifetime. So it's very challenging to not use satellite collars or some sort of telemetry collar in order to see where they go. We can't sort of chase after them. That's a bit dangerous. And also we couldn't keep up with them even if we wanted to. So polar bears move thousands of kilometers a year, some of them. females included with their cubs and the males as well. And the best way to find out where polar bears move to is either using a satellite collar on the females or an ear tag on the males. And that allows us not just to know where they go, I mean, that's part of it, but to understand more about their behavior, when they're more active, when they are less active, and what kind of sea ice habitat they use and is more important to them. And that's really crucial for conservation generally, understanding what is important to the bears for foraging, where are those ring seals that they're trying to get, and working towards conserving those habitats more.
So polar bears are a sea ice animal. They really are adapted to the Arctic environment to be out on the sea ice. Their Latin name, Ursus maritimus, means sea bear. They really depend on that sea ice because of access to their main prey, seals, like Vicky said. They rely on that marine mammal fat. They're really a fat-eating bear. Andy likes to call them a lipivore sometimes. They're not even a carnivore. You know, they love fat.
Yes.
And they can't get that on land. So it's really interesting to see them on land in Churchill before they leave for the winter. So the sea ice over Hudson Bay will be freezing up in the next month or so, and then the bears will leave us. So until then, we'll see them congregating on the edge and waiting for that sea ice to come back. That's why they're here right now, and it gives us a really neat look into what polar bears are doing. But of course, this collaring technology lets us see them in their actual habitat that they're using to get sustenance and to reproduce and to travel. Thank you so much, Vicky.
Definitely.
Okay, let's take another question. So someone is wondering, well, yeah, we talked about this earlier, but it's a really neat question. So how do we put collars on polar bears? Like, what's the process that scientists go to actually study these polar bears and handle them, and what kind of samples are we taking?
Yeah, so it's necessary to immobilize the polar bears before they'll let you put a collar on. So usually that's done from helicopters. People will be in the helicopter with a special dart gun, and in that dart is a drug that will immobilize the polar bears. And immobilizing means they can't move their limbs. They aren't asleep, and they're not unconscious, because when you're working on them, their eyes are wide open and they're watching, of course, what's going on. When they're immobilized, they go down quite quickly after the dart hits them in the shoulder, and then it's possible to safely approach them and then start the work of collaring. And it's not just the collaring that you want to do. You need to find out a bit more about the polar bear's state of health and if they're male or female, because sometimes from the air you can't actually tell.
Yeah.
And we try to be quite good about immobilizing just the females. Those are the ones that you put the collars on. But every now and then you get a large subadult male, and it's like, oh darn. So anyway, you check the sex. Putting the collar on itself is not that difficult. You need to put it on snugly, but not too snugly, to make sure that there's lots of circulation through their necks to their heads. That's really important. In terms of samples, it's really important to collect hair samples, blood samples, fat samples, hair samples, claw samples, and all of these things can tell you about the health of the bear, and also the diet, the kinds of species that the bears are eating, seals, whales, and other kinds of materials. Another thing that's done that helps people keep track of which bears have been captured and collared, because the collars do come off after a few years, that is to put lip tattoos just inside their mouth, in their lip, a special number just for that bear, and then also ear tags that also have the same number as the lip tag, and that's a way to find out later if that bear is captured again, if it has been captured before, but also to track how long bears are living in the natural world. Yeah, and doing all that, you do it as fast as possible. So you have your little team out there measuring and taking samples, putting the collar on, and hopefully within half an hour, everybody's off the bear. You go back to the helicopter and you kind of watch the bear for a while, make sure it's starting to regain movement in its head and its limbs, and then if everything looks good, off you go, and leave the bear alone until you start tracking it. And you hope that collar is going to work after all that effort.
Yeah, so we, and I'm sure you do too, get emails every few days from basically from the satellites, and you can download them, convert them, upload the data points where the bear is, and it's pretty neat technology, but without fail, it's a really harsh environment for technology to be in. The batteries, the cold, the water, the salt.
In and out of the water. You might imagine that bears, tippy-toe around on the ice exclusively, but they don't. They'll just jump right into that frozen, freezing to us, water, and if they're trying to catch a seal or just moving from ice flow to ice flow, and all that technology has to be able to withstand in and out of the water, and minus 40 and wind, and and possibly a bit of jostling between bears as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a paper that came out earlier this year that I was lucky enough to work on, the swimming paper by Pilfold et al. And we looked at long distance swimming in polar bears in the Beaufort Sea and Hudson Bay. And the bears in Hudson Bay, the way that the ice patterns are right now, they don't have to do many of these really long distance swims by the patterns of the ice. They still are doing long swims to us, but not the really, really long ones like we're seeing in the Beaufort Sea. I think the record holder in that paper was a subadult female, and it was 9 days and just over 400 kilometers she swam. So pretty impressive. They can swim for a very long time. Really interesting stuff. So we have a couple other questions coming in, which is great. Again, please send us your questions on the Explore page or Facebook. And you can actually also tweet at Polar Bears. We have our Polar Bears International folks keeping an eye on it, or even send questions to questions@pbears.org. So we'd love to hear from you. Actually, one neat thing, so let's kind of talk about figuring out the gender of polar bears, because when you're obviously on the ground and up close, you can figure it out pretty easily. But we even get that question on like the Tundra Buggy Lodge, right on the Tundra Buggies. And if it's a big male, you can often tell from quite a distance. But sometimes you have to let those animals get kind of close and kind of tell if it's, a young female or a subadult male. They can look pretty similar. So what I've been told, and maybe you can add more to this or you have your own system, is to actually look at what side they're peeing out of. So you look for the kind of pee hairs. So of course the male hairs you'll be able to see in front where they're peeing, and then the females will have a discoloration on the rear end. And so that's how I've been able to point it out to people before, like, oh, it's a female, you can see that little coloration there. I know the males also, the big boys on their forearms will have those really long ornamental hairs. Maybe they're kind of attractive to the ladies. I'm not sure.
Possibly. Another way, and it's always all relative, and how many bears you've seen too, but sometimes the shape of the head of the females, if you're looking straight on, comparing males and females, the females' heads are smaller, of course, because they're not as big. But even if a bear is kind of the same size, there's just this difference in solidness, I guess, because males have the testosterone, and their bodies may not be getting larger, but their heads might be already, and their necks might already have that big.
Which is the reason we can't collar the males. And the males can get GPS ear tags that don't last as long as collars, but they still give us the really great data. We don't have as long-term series for the males, and we're trying to learn more about male movements right now. All the collaring you'll see on our bear tracker, and many of the papers, the collaring is mostly female, so it'd be great to learn a bit more about what those big males are doing. Yes, absolutely. Let's see if we have any questions. So, someone's got a question, just like, how did you get into studying polar bears?
I was working at a job with national parks and in the Arctic in Nunavut, and the national parks that I was working in had polar bears that would come ashore in the summer, and that is when most tourists come to visit national parks. So we were quite concerned about keeping people and bears apart as much as possible, and providing good information. So I worked with a few people on public safety plans, and also analyzing data related to bear activity in the parks. And through that, I met Andy DeRoche doing a project. We created a video called Safety in Polar Bear Country, and he was one of the members on the team that worked on the script and getting the right messages out. And yeah, just through discussing things with him and thinking about what was I going to do with my life at that point, I was like, yeah, I would really like to go back and do another graduate degree. And I asked Andy if he would take me on, and he said yes, and I went through the process, and yeah, and here I am.
That's so neat.
Yeah, it was fabulous. It was one of those, you know, in life, you're working away and you're going down a certain road, and then you think about a new opportunity, and then you kind of veer off.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was really a good decision to go back to school. Yeah.
That's neat. Yeah, for me, kind of an accidental thing almost too. I was doing my undergrad degree, and for that I was putting little collars and backpacks on deer mice and spadefoot toads, just like these tiny little things, tromping around these kind of desert areas and forests, and just loving wildlife biology. I wanted to do a graduate degree, and my supervisor had gone to school with Andy DeRoche, and so connected us, and the timing just worked out for Andy. He, gets a lot of requests, but it just all worked out, and so ended up here years later, and it's been a really, really great ride. Lots of interesting stuff to learn. And so I actually live in Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories now, working up there, and then I work for PBI full-time year-round, and then during this time of year I get to come here, so Churchill's definitely become like a second home, and it's really neat. To maybe build a bit more context for those of you that also maybe haven't tuned into one of these before, so where we are right now in the Hudson Bay area, we're in Western Hudson Bay. That's what the polar bear population here is called, the Western Hudson Bay polar bears. There are 19 polar bear populations across the world and in 5 countries, so Canada, the US, Russia, Norway, and Greenland, Denmark. And so we can see the map there. So Canada has 2/3 of the world's polar bears, and the countries work together in different capacities to manage polar bears and conserve them across their range. So there we go, build in a bit of context, and I wish I could. So Hudson Bay are just the red rectangle, kind of one of the southern ones down there. So pretty neat. So we're at a neat spot for polar bears. These polar bears here are the best studied in the world, the most photographed in the world. They're really a special population, so it's lovely to see them. Okay, so we have we've got a question about the Churchill Northern Study Center. So a little bit earlier, we talked to Grant, who's the executive director at the CNSC, we call it, and they just do so much wonderful stuff here. You can check out more about this facility at churchillscience.ca. They do tons of research programs. They have lots of different groups through school groups, but also adult learning groups. You can volunteer. You can take part in an Earthwatch program where you can actually go and collect data and help scientists out here. So I would encourage you to check it out. This is a wonderful facility, really neat and lots of fun. One really cool thing that we've worked with on the City Center stuff is they also have a cam. So they host the Northern Lights cam through explore.org, and it's up here, mounted up top, and it's just beautiful. They are getting gorgeous aurora activity year-round, especially February, March. You might even see a visiting bird or two. So last year we had a resident gyrfalcon that was coming to visit all the time at this time of year. You get beautiful views of the tundra. There's footage from the cam right there. It's just really awesome. I encourage you to check that out. And of course, the other cams that we have out on the tundra. So usually we have the Buggy One cam. Buggy One is the Tundra Buggy vehicle. That's kind of our roving media and education studio. And so we'll roam out there most days looking for polar bears to get them on cam for you. We'll be where the action is on the tundra. We also have 2 cams mounted on the Tundra Buggy Lodge, so that look north and south in that area, and there's lots of neat stuff going on out there. And then we also have a Cape cam way out at Cape Churchill, a little ways from here, and they're getting really neat stuff on there. Yesterday there was a bunch of Arctic hares. They get really good polar bear activity out there. Last spring we saw a caribou herd go by. It's just really neat stuff. And the CNSC also helps support, especially this Cape cam, in the winter when we're not in town. The CNSC staff are, and they're going out there to help keep those batteries going and keep that cam running, so it's really neat. And just as a side note too, for those of you that maybe were checking out the cams in the summer, the Beluga Boat Cam is also hosted out of Churchill with PBI, Explore, Frontiers North, Sea North Tours. It's always taking a lot of great partners to work together on programs like this. But that beluga boat's pretty cool. You can see some footage of belugas underwater and listen to their vocalizations, and it's gorgeous. And we're working with Stefan Peterson at the Assiniboine Park Zoo, who couldn't be here this afternoon, but we're working with him and Explore to kind of get a beluga boat citizen science project off the ground. So please stay tuned for that. We're hoping that we can make it so that Explore.org community members can watch some of this footage, look at snapshots that are taken, and help us study the belugas of the Churchill River. It would be amazing. So keep tuned for that. We're going to keep the Explore community updated on what's going on with that. And for those of you that I think were watching earlier on one of the lodge cams, you could see Stefan. He was actually on the back of a buggy, and we had a bear there that was checking him out. It was pretty neat. Yeah, so he didn't have he had a good day out there. Yeah, I'll have to show you.
Excellent.
And if you saw him pointing a camera at the bear, that was actually his FLIR camera. And the FLIR camera is picking up kind of the thermo. How would you explain FLIR? You can explain it better than I can, Vicky.
Yeah, so it senses thermal radiation, so infrared. And so if he pointed the camera at us, he would see the outline of our figures. And same with the polar bears. So you'd see this kind of body. Maybe not really crisp, but a little blob out there. And he uses that, I think, for seal monitoring as well, because they're quite warm relative to the background, to the sea ice, and they really stand out. So that's a good way to get a count.
Yeah. And he took a little video this morning doing that, and he posted it on his Instagram. And so I've put the link to his Instagram in the comment section, and I can do that again if anyone can't find it, but it's a little video clip of kind of the thermo imprint of a polar bear. It's neat. And I remember a couple years ago, Stefan was up with us again, and we were coming back to the lodge late at night. And I mean, it's pitch black. We couldn't see anything, but he's like, oh, maybe I'll get the FLIR out. So we're rolling just in the dark, getting back to the lodge, and he's got the FLIR. And you can like pick out polar bears, just their thermo image in the FLIR camera that we would never see with our bare eyes. So if we'd had to get out or something, it would have been a good safety thing maybe too, but we didn't. It was kind of neat.
An expensive safety tool.
Yeah, that wouldn't be your go-to safety tool. And actually, that's a good segue. So you're really involved with the human-bear conflict, keeping bears and people safe. You actually had a meeting here in, was it February or March? March, at the Churchill Northern Study Center to meet with people from across the Hudson Bay region and the north to talk about human bear safety. So maybe you could just talk to people a little bit about what the issues are with human bear conflict and some of the mitigation things that people are working on right now.
Right, okay, just a wee bit, yes.
Yeah.
So when we did have that meeting, which was coordinated by a number of organizations, the Study Center here, also University of Saskatchewan, World Wildlife Fund, and Polar Bears International all got together to coordinate this meeting and brought people from as many locations around Hudson Bay, both Manitoba, Nunavut, and Quebec and Ontario, to talk about their issues related to human bear conflict. And most of the issues are centered around the ice-free season, when bears are off the ice and on the land and can't get back on the ice because it isn't there, and the bears are moving around and getting into trouble with people. Often they're attracted into communities because there are garbage dumps and with food waste, and that definitely attracts the bears because they are hungry. So they get in there and mess around, but also like here in Churchill and other small communities in Nunavut and around Hudson Bay, bears will go into town, and that creates a great disturbance, of course, because there's people and kids running around, and it's not very safe. So together we were discussing ways to better monitor for these instances, better ways to reduce the attractants, and that was really the main discussion. Better ways to train people to react to instances when polar bears are mixing in with people, especially in town. So a lot of safety related training polar bear guards, which was one of the big topics as well, and that actually got off the ground this June to train people to be polar bear guards. And other tools that people could use individually or as a community, so things like electric fences to surround your camp so bears don't break into your cabin or surround your meat caches, because they are very attracted to meat caches, which people have in the north. A good way to keep your stuff cold, put it in the ground. There's all that nice permafrost. You don't really need a freezer, but the bears, they can smell it. So things like that, and how to use deterrents. What kinds of deterrents are there, like cracker shells and that kind of thing. So, and other noisemakers and visual types of deterrents too. So, yeah, that was a very great, fantastic discussion, and really, I think, inspired the communities to some communities to take action, because sometimes it's really hard because you don't have the information.
Right.
And then you don't know who to ask for help either. So that was another good thing. They met all the people that are involved, and hopefully will reduce the number of bears getting into trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's that was almost one of the themes of this week too, is connecting people via technology. So of course, getting people here to have a face-to-face is great, but it's really hard to get internet into the communities a lot of the time, or get really good communication flow. So anytime you can get people talking to one another and problem solving, it's really neat. And so a lot of people have also seen Randy on the camera at the launch from the Buggy One camp.
Oh, good.
And and Randy was one that took part in this bear guard training, right?
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was in June. So that was sort of the first large group that was trained with this manual that was developed, and I helped develop it with a few other people. And we had a class of 20, I believe, in all different organizations and all private industry as well. So Northern Frontiers had several staff there.
Oh, excellent.
Getting trained. So yeah, so I was pretty excited when I came a few weeks ago and was at the Buggy launch, and I was like, wow, there's a polar bear guard.
Yeah,
and
it's working.
It's Randy. So it's really fabulous, and I think people see the utility in it, and hopefully it will continue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So Vicky, do we expect, so sea ice patterns are changing in the north, and do we expect that you might see more conflict as the years goes on, and you want to train people now, or does it depend where you're at in the Arctic?
Yeah, it does depend on where you are and sort of the ice patterns, but definitely around Hudson Bay, Fox Basin, Davis Strait, Baffin Bay, all of these places with seasonal sea ice, and places that are getting to be seasonal sea ice areas like the Beaufort Sea. The ice is starting to go. Bears are on shore more often and longer, and there's just more potential for unfortunate incidents because the bears have time to move around more. Historically, I think even here the bears probably stayed in a relatively small area, and it seems like there's changing distribution because they have more time to walk around and just look for opportunistic bits of food. Yeah, so it has been sort of an increasing issue, and people in the communities have said there's more bears coming into our towns, and people want to see action, and both on climate change, but also on the more immediate issues of keeping everybody safe.
Absolutely. Yeah, keeping people safe is definitely the number one priority, especially children. And Halloween's coming up here, and it's lots of fun in Churchill. And so we'll have extra polar bear patrols. The RCMP will be looking. We'll have extra helicopters around the whole town, kind of keeps everyone safe. And no doubt everyone will be safe, but it does take all eyes looking out so those kids can get out and get some candy. Gotta have the important stuff in life. So, and I know up north, is it Arvit that has had to cancel Halloween a couple times?
Well, sort of cancel Halloween in that people walking door to door trick-or-treating. So instead of doing that, just because it's just hard to keep, they don't have the resources nor the helicopters or anything like that to have that kind of intense surveillance. So instead at one of the community areas like a high school or a community center, there'll be a special Halloween party, and there'll be all sorts of fun things set up for kids, and no doubt very scary. That's what it's all about, and opportunities to get candy, which is, I think, the highlight.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, Churchill's really a kind of unique place in terms of how many resources it can dedicate to the polar bear patrols and things like that. And I remember, for any of you that may have watched our beluga boat cams in the summer. We had a couple local student interns that we hired with explore.org. And we had one of the gals, Terry, over the other night. You were there, yeah. And Terry's very excited for the Halloween party that's coming up. They have a high school party. And I think for the adults, Friday night's the big party night in town here, so everyone will be on pretty good behavior. But yeah, Churchill does Halloween really, really well. So just to maybe touch on what we mean when we're talking about the changing sea ice patterns in Hudson Bay. So the polar bears here, the Western Hudson Bay polar bears, they are on land about 3 to 4 weeks longer than they used to be in around the 80s, 90s. So this is because the sea ice is freezing up a bit later than it used to, and it's breaking up a bit earlier. And so you're just extending that on land period. And like Vicky said, that gives the bears more opportunity to walk around, to interact with people, which we don't want. It also gives them fewer opportunities to hunt, which is what we get concerned with polar bears. When they're on land, we do see them eating berries and seaweed. They really like that kelp out there. They'll get goose eggs. They'll even get an occasional maybe caribou carcass or something. But these terrestrial-based foods aren't enough for a polar bear long term, especially a polar bear population. So polar bears get so big and fat, and they get healthy when they're eating marine mammal fat. So they really need seals. They need the calories they're finding out in the ocean environment, using sea ice as a platform to get those seals and other prey out of the ocean. That's really where the good eating is for a polar bear. There's a reason that the brown bears in this area don't get nearly as big, or there's not many of them. There's just not the calories on land for such a big bear species to really thrive out here. On the ground. They need to be out on that ice over the ocean. And so what we worry about long term is when we see these populations that have experienced some sea ice loss and that are on land longer, we have seen declines in the number of bears, the number of cubs produced, the body condition, the size, and things like that. And indications are right now that if nothing changes about the trends that we're seeing, then we could lose polar bears in some parts of the world by the end of the century, and we don't want that to happen. We want to protect all the habitats. It looks like the Canadian archipelago and some regions up there, can stick around for a lot longer than areas like the seasonal Hudson Bay sea ice, but we want to keep the seasonal Hudson Bay sea ice here. Sea ice is really important not only to polar bears. There's an entire Arctic ecosystem that really depends on the sea ice. It is to the ocean what soil is to a forest. It's growing the base of this food chain of the Arctic. It's growing the microorganisms in it that are feeding the other microorganisms, feeding the fish, feeding the seals, feeding the bears, and feeding the people. This entire ecosystem works in harmony with all the others around the world. And the cool thing about Arctic sea ice too is that no matter where you live, you in a way feel its impacts. So it acts like Earth's air conditioner. It reflects sunlight away from Earth, and it prevents the heat from entering the ocean. And it helps keep our entire planet cool because it's such a massive sheet over the north. And so it's cooling us down no matter where we are, so we want to keep it up there. If the planet loses sea ice, then we're going to see some things go out of balance, and we don't want that. So we need to protect Arctic sea ice for polar bears, but also for all the other creatures, including ourselves and our way of life. And so the big things that we look at when we're talking about conservation, because this is such a long-term plan, sea ice is a habitat that we can't just grow back when we want to, or kind of protect certain pockets of it based on whatever we decide. It's not like a forest where we can go plant more trees. It's really has to be a proactive approach. And so we talk about switching to more renewable energies that don't release the gas emissions that act like a heat-trapping blanket around our planet and thicken that heat-trapping blanket, doing things like solar, wind, all those great greener energies. And they're healthier for people too, and I mean, they're available. We have this technology. And so it's really neat to see what people are doing. So if you are doing cool things in your community, whether you're a student or an adult, we love to hear about that stuff. Next week is Polar Bear Week. And so we'll be doing stuff all week long, talking about polar bears and kind of neat things you can do for your environment and in your classroom. We have Project Polar Bear. If you're a classroom or a teacher and you're interested in signing up for a neat kind of contest where you do a project and connect with other schools across the world, check out Project Polar Bear. It's really fun. We've had some really neat groups come through Project Polar Bear. And yeah, just keep watching our Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Explorers as well. Next week we will have the BBC with us for a few days. That'll be lots of fun. We'll be roaming around the tundra, and we'll be doing live chats and Facebook chats. and it's going to be a really fun time, I think, and keep sending us your questions. We also do have another live chat scheduled for tomorrow morning. The location is TBD, to be determined, but maybe back on Buggy One, or maybe back here, or maybe from our living room in Churchill. We don't know yet, so stay tuned for that. But it's going to be really great. And so we would really love to thank Explore.org, as always. Just wonderful being able to do this. Thank you to Frontiers North Adventures. Frontiers North Adventures donated a day buggy today to take out some students and teachers from Churchill and also in other parts of Manitoba to get out and see the polar bears. It's not too often that locals actually get a chance to do that, so it's really awesome. We're looking forward to see when they get back into town and hear about their day, so thank you for that. Also need to thank, of course, Canada Goose and the Churchill Northern Study Center, where we've been parked all day. They were gracious enough when we showed up this morning to make some room for us. It's been fun.
Wonderful lunch too.
Oh God, lunch was so good. Yeah, mac and cheese and great salad and just, BJ had a cupcake, apparently it was pretty good. Might have to check those out. So thank you to everyone too for watching. It's been lots of fun, and we will see you around really soon, I'm sure. So thanks everybody.